Your sensors are correct. Do not adjust your heading. You've discovered the Omega Particle, streaming to the Alpha Quadrant and beyond. Here's your host, the anchorman of the Federation, the Doctor of Dilithium. This is Jonathan Wiegand.
Welcome to the Omega Particle Podcast. I am your gracious and humble host, Jonathan Wiegand, like it just was mentioned. And good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are turning in across the Alpha Quadrant. We welcome you to the Strange New Worlds review. And I just feel like, the talking heads at Paramount Plus, or as I affectionately call it, PP Plus, decide, hey, it's going to be a good idea that we're going to release 3 episodes of Strange New Worlds within about a week and a half. So it has completely ruined my schedule of reviewing and script writing and all this kind of setup I have. And I am forced to chug down 3 or 4 review episodes right now in a single sitting. So not to worry. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to this marathon. And for you listening, if you're listening one by one, or if it's the first time listening, welcome. But we are the hardest working Trek podcast on the market today. And it's nothing that my team here can't handle. And yours truly is the anchorman of the Federation. So we're excited to get down into the nitty gritty and Strange New Worlds. And I'll just start off and I'll say, just as a brief overview, this was probably my least favorite episode of the season, just to be upfront. It doesn't mean it was a bad episode. It wasn't a bad writing or anything like that. It just wasn't as much fun, if I can say that, but it just didn't land for me personally. And, that's okay. It had that classic original series plot line. It brought over some heavy themes that we'll get into. But to me, I just didn't hit. And you know what? That's okay. However, I completely understand why some people think it's awesome and they like it a lot. And it's really a episode for her to shine in. And I totally get it. Totally awesome. No problem there. And before I get into the deep dive of the review, I think it's imperative to kind of reiterate the quality of television, particularly the caliber of acting and, the writing that we've had in Star Trek. Now, I know that's not always the case with like Discovery and some other Trek shows that we've had, but I would say like Prodigy has been really great. Picard season 3 has been really great. And I think Strange New Worlds season 2 has been really great. And so I say all of that to say this is that Star Trek and all these other social media companies and streaming companies hinges, on equitable pay and favor work conditions for the writers and, actors across all the levels. Because, and if you didn't know this, there's a massive strike going on with the Writers Guild of America and the Studios Actors Guild. And it's called SAG-AFTRA, but I think it's just, to me, the more I've researched it, and we might put another episode out once Strange New Worlds is kind of wrapped up and kind of deep diving into the whole strike again, because it's just really crazy, especially, with the bullying tactics that the studios are doing. They're cutting down trees. They're threatening AI and kind of giving a shaft to everybody on the actor side of it and even on the writer side. So I just kind of want the fans of the franchise, fans of Trek, that it's going to probably have some immediate setbacks, and such as hiatus, in actor and writer interviews and reduced celebrity presence at conventions, which there are a few Trek conventions going on now. So that might actually bleed over into that, or they might show up and not only be able to talk about certain things, not really anything about Trek related. And all, of course, as you've probably seen, if you're a fan of any type of movie, the adjustment to the release schedule. And that's been it's going to be a big issue. So I think from what I've heard on the street, as they say, is that it's going to be a very long and arduous journey, for the strikers. And so we obviously support them here and hope that they get everything that they are asking for, and that we can get back to what we do best, and that's making awesome shows and creative content and things like that. But I just want to point that out again. If you haven't, check it out on especially social media. You can share a story, anything like that. That's the last probably I'm going to mention about it until we get another big episode coming out after Strange New Worlds is detailing everything about the strike and all the components of it. But without further delay, Luna, let's get into our review on Lost in Translation. First off, I love the pun of this episode, and to me, it's a direct call back to an amazing movie. And of course, Luna, my intern, everybody. I'm talking about the 2003 hit with Bill Murray and a very young Scarlett Johansson, a movie called Lost in Translation. If you haven't seen this movie, definitely go watch it. It's fantastic. So I'll probably make a cover art for the episode, like a pun on the movie poster there. But moving on to this Strange New Worlds episode, I have to say it's kind of ventured a little bit into uncharted territories for Trek in general, particularly when it comes to portraying aliens. It definitely defies the norms of what we perceive to be extraterrestrial beings. I mean, there's no small gray men with huge eyes, kind of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, typical alien idea. That's not really the case, and frequently Star Trek has done that. They depict aliens as vaguely humanoid and following similar folds and molds, but this episode kind of took a bold departure from that, and to me made me think of this movie, came out a few years ago, called Arrival. It was kind of interesting because these aliens communicated with symbols, and it was just very unlike anything we've ever seen before with science fiction. So I kind of got that vibe from it, and as a result of this new way to portray aliens, it treated, to a lot of people and myself, like it was an interesting hour of television, and the spotlight was firmly fixed on Uhura. She finds herself entangled in this perplexing web of hallucinations on one point, and then eerie sounds, and she thinks something's going wrong in her brain and she can't figure it out. And then all the while we have the formidable Starfleet under the guidance of Captain Pike as fleet commander, and they're going to start advancing their fleet mining capabilities. And so you kind of have this blend of this cosmic intrigue and personal struggle that Uhura's happening, and then also on the separate plot you have this technological innovation kind of forms the crux of this science fiction episode. And it's very, like I mentioned at the top of the show, very original series vibes. That's what I really got from it. And it kind of does a great way of blending throughout the entire episode. Now, I will have to say that Cecilia Rose Gooding delivers just an amazing performance as Uhura. It's a standout portrayal, finally gets an episode to herself to kind of just really explore and do everything she needs to do with her acting chops. Awesome. She just allowed to infuse depth to the character's crises. And I mean, it's kind of ironic in a way that this communications officer is unable to effectively communicate and with everybody around her and open up. So it was Gooding to just conveys, just essence of the episode, in my opinion. And then also we have this kind of crazy scenarios with Kirk, and this reality's version of Kirk, whose connection to Leanne differs, significantly. Instead, he finds himself embroiled in confrontations with his brother Sam, true to the quintessential Kirk fashion. And what I really loved is that we really see the weight of their father's legacy over both of them, with James emboldening this idealist and Sam kind of content in his station and content in his place in life. And that was either is perfectly fine, but you can definitely see that they are both burdened by achievements and stepping into the limelight of their father's image. And then strikingly, Strange New Worlds kind of uses this episode as a subtle introduction to the main timelines version of Kirk, almost teasingly avoiding a potential grand encounter with Kirk and Leanne at some point. I mean, though it's tempting to discuss, imagine what they might have, but I just think it's given Leanne's inability to recount their shared experiences. I mean, the episode's pretty restrained in that between the two, Leanne and Kirk, but the regard is good, is laudable, so you can't offer that. Furthermore, what I definitely love about this episode is that Strange New World stands apart from the Abrams blockbuster. And I know what some of you might think. I think there's like a terrible comment. Some guys like on the podcast saying like, oh, this guy loves the Abrams Trek. And I'm like, that's further from the truth. I actually don't like them at all. So I definitely like that this presents a departure that complements the evolving Trek universe. Especially, what makes this work so well as opposed to Abrams' Trek is that the series possesses such a youthful energy. This ambition, driving leadership, this undeniable ego. I think it's really done well, especially with Wesley's performance as Kirk, and Ethan Peck's performance as Spock, and Gooding's performance as Uhura. I know, and a lot of people may say, like, especially with Kirk's portrayal, it might be a little cheesy, but that's kind of the exact cheese that the original series thrived on, had this layer of charm and then a layer like mixed with authenticity, mixed with some cheese, so it's really okay. Like, I think it works very well, and that's very difficult to do, particularly for a fan base that's kind of been overwhelmed with pre-Kirk and Captain Enterprise scenarios. I will say this, that it was a very cool and thoughtful way of crafting Kirk's initial meeting with Spock and choosing, this low-key chess game over this big, grand spectacle that was shaping the universe. It was just, very calm, just unique chess game. That was it. And to me, proves just the uniqueness of Strange New Worlds. It proves the thoughtfulness of it, is that it doesn't always have to be over the top, crazy mind games. It can just be a little bit realistic. These two people didn't know who they were going to become. They're just like playing a low-key chess game. So there you go. I'm just really happy that, and I knew this was going to happen at some point, but to me, I'm just happy that it's just such a divergent from the 2009 reboot, because this is the right way to evolve the Star Trek series, in my opinion, and I'm finally glad that we're here. And speaking of remarkable performances, we really can't say that without mentioning Wesley's dedication to this role, and in every episode he's in, it's one of the best performances of that episode, so you really can't give him any flack for that. It's become just a great delight, for him to be in the episodes and kind of be sprinkled in through there. And I think that's always something. And if you disagree with me, please debate. That's what we're here for. Please reach out on social media and be like, Jonathan, you are full of it. This Kirk is terrible. He's nothing but cheese and a womanizer. Getting back to the episode as a whole, I think Lost in Translation, to me, carries this a powerful message centered on the importance of just active listening, and empathy. And that's really a message we need to hear in today's day and time. And we'll definitely get into that later on in the episode. But an example of this is Pike's willingness to shoulder the blame for Uhura's actions should anything go awry. He's like, I'll take the heat, and that's what good leadership does. It allows the people under their command to be able to be free to make mistakes and try new things, and that's awesome of Pike to do that. And I think, speaking of Pike, this is an ingenious and canon-compliant approach of having Kirk and Pike meet when technically Pike was a fleet commander. It's just a subtle touch by the writers and by the showrunners, because it just profoundly enriches the narrative showcasing the show's attention to detail. So if you didn't know, back in the original series, Pike and Kirk first met when Pike was a fleet commander. And as you all know, Pike is not normally a fleet commander on the week to week, but extenuating circumstances, he is this week. So the first time that Kirk and Pike meet, he is a fleet commander. So it's just little tips of the hat and touches that make you think, okay, the writers are paying attention. They're not just trying to do a 9-to-5 job and push this out. Moreover, I think what adds so much depth to this episode is that Kirk and Uhura kind of add a little bit more of emotional growth in both of the people. And that's something that is very difficult to do and something we don't see too often. I think positioning this episode as an epilogue to explore Hemar's death serves as kind of a reflection, on Uhura's character development. It highlights her strength and her resilience and kind of just exemplifies the growth that she has undergone. And this B plot further explores the complexities of the characters' personalities with Una and Pela kind of engaging clashes over their differences. Una is perplexed by Pela's lack of progress, despite that she's thousands of years old, and is just kind of perplexed that Pela's content with who she is as an individual. She's completely okay with who she is and accepting of that. And this dynamic brings out the best in the both characters and effectively supplements the main plot, where understanding the aliens hinges on active listening, a theme seamlessly intertwined with the early version of the characters depicted in the series. And I think this thoughtful exploration of these foundational character traits reminds viewers that this show presents early renditions of these beloved characters. And I think they integrating elements of their personalities and experience that will ultimately shape their future selves. And this attention to continuity and character evolution adds to the show's, I think, authenticity and just makes it endearing to Star Trek fans of all ages and of, all people. Though the skillful weaving of the main and the B plots, Lost in Translation overall masterfully emphasizes the significance of empathy, understanding, and active listening, and is a powerful reminder of the potential strength that lies with interpersonal connections and mutual respect. So, like all great sci-fi and science fiction, I've said this on the podcast a million times, is that sometimes Star Trek has real-world commentary mixed in with it. And this idea of a strange signal, that drives those who consume it insane is a powerful resonance in the context of modern culture, modern pop culture, social media, particularly in a show set in 200, 300 years in the future. And I know a lot of people say, well, Star Trek shouldn't be complimenting or commentary on real world. And it's just like, Star Trek has always existed in that conversation. And whether it be, the race or the Vietnam War or gay marriage or anything, or gay relations, it's just the allegories have always been there. And in Lost Translation is no exception. It's not very subtle. It recalls, to me, what I got from the episode is that there are plenty of, news stories and news channels and social media is that we're completely bombarded. And you hear from all the time about how, if you consume these things all the time, it makes you more aggressive, makes you more depressed, makes you more irrational, makes you more belligerent, kind of warps your sense of reality, and it makes you hard to communicate with. Aha! Makes you hard to share ideas with. Aha! So that is where the connection, to me, where Lost in Translation could, be a bridge to the real world, because there are moments in Lost in Translation that are very on the nose. So for example, Uhura has a revelation about what's happening when she plays back a recording of Lieutenant Hemmer. And she's talking about how strong charge can burn out the receiver. And that's very true in real life. And the issue ultimately in the episode comes down to one of miscommunication. And Uhura figures out that the signal's coming from living organisms inside the nebula. And when I watched this episode, it immediately made me think of the Voyager trope that, I think, what were the episodes, Luna? The Cloud and Bliss kind of has this expected trope on Star Trek shows. That, there's something alive in that nebula besides coffee. So it turns out, the whole problem in this episode is not listening, and then it can be solved by simply listening. And the closing scene, Kirk muses that all it took was a good listener. So I think that's a good real life commentary on the times, and what we consume and how it affects our personalities and our mental health. And, it's always important to listen and to be a good listener. Side note, so listen to this. Somebody pointed out this episode detail to me, and I was like, I have to mention it on the review, and I don't want to let this go. So we know Captain Pike monologues about the importance of, this refinery, that it's just not a gas station, Lieutenant. I think he told that to Ortega. And it's right on the edge of the frontier. It unlocks half the quadrant. It'll be a jumping off point for the next great age of exploration. But Spock mentioned a line here, and he was a little bit more cynical because he said that he was assuming Starfleet's building this because of the nebula's proximity to Gorn space. So Strange New Worlds is struggling to, reconcile the contradiction between the fantasy of Starfleet and this idealistic ideology as that, a million species, limitless diversity, or whatever the saying is, Luna. They're struggling with that, and then also Starfleet being this organization that is a military power and protecting the quadrant. And this is definitely apparent with the Gorn. And these are eventual themes that we'll get into in Deep Space Nine. But I think, and after this interaction and hearing this from Spock, Pike is conceded to say, you're right. He said, sadly, you're right. He told Spock, the presence is growing from the Gorn, and this will help us counter it. So it's kind of a pointed statement, in Lost in Translation, that Pike destroying the refinery and implicitly rejecting its purpose to keep the Gorn in check as a counter to their expansion. To me, it's just kind of interesting to see the dynamic between the two finally coming out a little bit, because that's something that it is almost like a military power in some ways as the Federation grows, but it's still keeping that spirit of exploration. Really difficult to see. However, I will say really quick before we end the review and get on to the Easter eggs, is that I loved how Lost in Translation kind of chose to respect Hemmer's death. It didn't decide to resurrect him, in the same way Discovery decided to resurrect their doctor. That was just so bad. I'm sorry. It's completely taken me out of it. I'm not a big fan of Discovery, and I think casual listener will know that, but I definitely think that leaving Hemmer's death alone and just letting the crew continue to grieve, I think was a smart way. And thematically, I would say a large part of Lost in Translation is, and it's about the idea of having to move on from a loss and accepting the inevitability of change. Change is always going to be there. So let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think, it was a simple original TOS story, or is there something more? Again, it didn't really land for me this week, but that's okay. So let me know. Reach out to me on social media. I'd love to hear from you guys. And so moving on to our Easter eggs, we only have a few for you today, but very curious here. So like I said, and earlier in the episode, so we have Sam and Jim Kirk reunite in this episode, which is the first times on Strange New Worlds we've seen them on screen together. And it's also the first time we've only seen them both alive and canon on screen together, because Sam's only appearance in the original series was that of a dead body. That was it. So here, Sam, is complaining that Kirk is showing off because he's become the youngest first officer in history, and previously that record was held by his dad, first officer of the Kelvin. Yes, it's a stupid reference to the J.J. Abrams Trek movie, but what can you do? But notice in this universe, the Kirk boys refer to their father in the present tense. That's because George Samuel Kirk Sr. is alive in this timeline, and we'll keep it that way. So while the Kelvin timeline was specifically created for, the first J.J. Abrams movies, the idea is that what we kind of see at the beginning of that reboot film is the prime timeline in 2233. So that timeline was altered when the Kelvin was destroyed, and Kirk was born, quote unquote, early in space instead of in Iowa. Though although the Kelvin established the Kelvin verse or the Abrams verse, it also exists in regular canon too. And in theory, somebody playing an older George Kirk Sr. could guest star in Strange New Worlds someday, like Chris Hemsworth, which if you didn't know, in the 2009 film Star Trek, that is actually how he got his audition for Thor. They saw his work as George, and they're like, we got to bring this guy on. And another Easter egg is Uhura's family shuttlecraft. So the final vision Uhura sees from the Nebula aliens is that from the shuttle crash that killed her family. And this was mentioned back in Season 1, Episode 2, Children of the Comet. But here we see the actual shuttle wreckage. This event, retroactively, has defined Uhura's backstory, not just in Strange New Worlds, but in all of Trek canon as well. So we finally get to see that shuttle crash in this episode. But the biggest Easter egg of them all, and we mentioned it a little bit before, is that Kirk and Spock meet for the first time. At the end of the episode, as Uhura and Kirk are hanging out in this bar, Spock joins them. And it's just, to me, it's just finally, we're in the normal timeline because, Paul Wesley and Ethan Peck have been on screen together twice already in Strange New Worlds, but both times their characters were in alternate timelines. So this one finally stuck. We're here. So, if you don't remember in Season 1 finale, Quality of Mercy, Kirk and Spock are in the altered timeline, and when Pike is in command of the Enterprise during the events of Balance of Terror. And then in the recent Season 2 episode, Tomorrow, whatever. How many tomorrows? 3, Luna? Okay, 3 tomorrows. Kirk speaks to the version of Spock who is a captain of the Vulcan fleet. But Lost in Translation marks the actual first time Kirk and Spock meet in the prime timeline. And this meeting has never been depicted on screen before, although there's been some non-canon novels, notably McIntyre's Enterprise, the first adventure, did depict Kirk, Uhura, and Spock all meeting for the first time. But that story is nothing like the story from Strange New Worlds. Then again, we get Uhura's first name, Nyota, from the Star Trek novels, so who knows, we might get something here too. First name maybe one day, and Star Trek canon is always in flux, and it's just, yeah. And clearly, when it comes to filling in new pieces of information with the backstories of the classic characters and the classic crew, Strange New Worlds is just getting started. Okay, that has been our entire review episode of Lost in Translation with our Easter egg. So thank you all so much for listening. And Luna, let's light this candle. Oh boy. So that was an intense episode, and I'm kind of glad that we have the fun, finally, Strange New Worlds Lower Decks crossover on their next review. That's amazing. Episode 7 of Season 2 is, I think it's called The Old Scientist, so I'm super pumped to cover that. That's the episode we've all been waiting for, or I know I've personally been waiting for since they announced it probably like a year or so ago. Really curious how it's going to turn out, so hopefully it'll be great. But again, thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please reach out to us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, Twitter, or is it X now? Gosh, what is X? Who cares? I'm more on Instagram more these days now than anyway, guys. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Helps us out, helps out the podcast. Remember, guys, we talked about it a little bit in this episode. Communicate, be a good listener. And as always, second star to the right, straight on till morning.